This is Hank. He's 75 years old, a widower, and the only person on this street who still uses a lawnmower with a pull cord. He's lived in this house for 50 years, long before the HOA, the Homeowners Association, turned the neighborhood into a perfectly manicured prison. Hank believes in freedom. He believes a man's truck is his own business, and he believes that if his tire is on his own grass, it's not a big deal. This is Brenda. She's the president of the HOA. She believes in rules. She believes in order. She believes that the small print of the bylaws is the sacred text of this community. And when she sees Hank's truck, with one tire an inch off the asphalt, she doesn't see a slight mistake. She sees an act of rebellion. And in this perfect little suburb, an act of rebellion is a declaration of war. Hank's truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 named Old Betsy, was his pride and joy. It had hauled lumber, pulled out tree stumps, and, just yesterday, had carried a massive load of his grandson's junk from the city. Exhausted, he had pulled into his driveway, too tired to worry about parking perfectly. One of the back tires had found its way onto the soft, green shoulder of his lawn. He figured he would move it in the morning. That was his first mistake. Brenda, with her clipboard and her power suit, wasn't one to wait for the morning. She walked to the truck, her expensive heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown. Her face, usually a mask of polite authority, was pinched with disapproval. The HOA bylaws were clear. No vehicles shall be parked on the lawn or landscaped areas for any period of time. To Brenda, this wasn't just a rule. It was the foundation of the neighborhood's value. It was a sign of respect, of order, of a perfect life. Hank's truck was a stain on her masterpiece. She took a picture with her phone, a cold, clinical flash that seemed to capture not just the truck, but Hank's stubborn defiance. Then, she scribbled a note on a violation slip, her handwriting as sharp and precise as her demeanor. When Hank stepped outside a few hours later, a cool evening breeze rustling the leaves, he saw the note tucked under his windshield wiper. He read it, his brow furrowing. It was a formal violation notice. Violation of Section 7B, improper vehicle parking. It even had the photograph attached. It demanded the truck be moved immediately and warned of a fine. Hank chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He walked over, picked up the notice, and calmly crumpled it into a ball. He wasn't malicious, just tired of being told what to do. His wife, bless her soul, had always handled the HOA nonsense. Now, he was on his own. He looked at his truck, then at his lawn, and shrugged. It was his property. It was his truck. He decided he'd move it when he was good and ready. He walked inside, tossed the note into the trash, and didn't think about it again. That was his second mistake. The next morning, Hank woke up to the sound of a horn. It wasn't a gentle honk. It was an angry, prolonged blare. He opened his front door to find a brand new, gleaming black SUV blocking his driveway. He couldn't get his truck out. Brenda stood beside her vehicle, a triumphant smirk on her face. Her arms were crossed, and she held a freshly printed copy of the HOA bylaws in her hand. "Good morning, Hank," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Section 1 for C. Enforcement of violations may include, but is not limited to, the temporary obstruction of a violating vehicle's exit. Hank stared at her, then at the massive SUV. His eyes narrowed, a slow, simmering anger starting to bubble. "You can't be serious, Brenda. This is ridiculous. The rules are the rules." "Hank," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes, "your truck is a violation. It will remain a violation until it is moved. My car will remain right here until it is." Hank felt a flicker of something in his gut, not fear, but a quiet, dangerous resolve. He looked at the truck he needed to get to the hardware store. He looked at Brenda's smug face. He looked at the perfect, manicured street. He took a step forward, his voice slow and firm. "You're not moving it. Not until your truck is in compliance," she confirmed, a glint of victory in her eyes. "All right," Hank said, a faint smile touching his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who just found out the game was on. "Then I guess neither of us is going anywhere." He turned and walked back into his house, leaving Brenda and her pristine SUV stranded in the middle of the street. Brenda's smile vanished. She looked at her car, then at the street, a bewildered look on her face. She had expected him to apologize and move his truck. She had not expected him to simply abandon the conflict. She had trapped his car, but in doing so, she had also trapped her own. And in her surprise, she didn't see the silent, creative gears starting to turn in Hank's mind. Brenda had expected a quick victory. Hank, she assumed, would grumble, perhaps curse under his breath, but ultimately concede. He was an old man, set in his ways, but surely not foolish enough to challenge the HOA president in such a direct and public manner. But, as the minutes turned into an hour, and Hank's front door remained firmly shut, a cold dread began to creep in. She was blocking the entire street. Delivery trucks would be unable to pass. Worse, other neighbors, usually so compliant, were starting to emerge. Mrs. Henderson, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair, walked her poodle, casting a pointed glance at Brenda's illegally parked SUV. Mr. Chen, a retired engineer, paused his morning walk to observe the spectacle, a barely concealed smirk on his face. Brenda felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She, the enforcer of rules, was now the biggest violator on the block. Her own trap had ensnared her. She tried calling Hank's house, but he didn't answer. She knocked on his door, a polite tap that quickly turned into an insistent pound. Nothing. It was as if he had vanished. Around noon, a tow truck arrived, slowly making its way down the street, its yellow lights flashing. Brenda's heart pounded. She hadn't called them. It stopped right behind her SUV. The driver, a burly man named Mike, stepped out. "Morning, ma'am. Got a call about an illegally parked vehicle blocking the road." He gestured vaguely at her SUV. Brenda gaped. No, not my car, his." She pointed frantically at Hank's truck. "His is the violation." Mike looked from her immaculate SUV to Hank's slightly lawn-infringing pickup. "Well, your car is definitely blocking the road, Mum, and I'm afraid that's a bigger safety hazard." Section 3A of City Code, obstructing traffic. Brenda was speechless. She was about to argue when Hank's front door finally opened. He stepped out, a coffee mug in hand, looking remarkably refreshed. "Oh, hello, Mike," Hank said, a perfectly innocent tone in his voice. "Glad you could make it? This lady here seems to have a bit of a problem. Her car's completely blocking my driveway and the street." Mike nodded, suppressing a grin. "Indeed, sir. Looks like a clear violation." He started preparing to tow Brenda's SUV. Brenda, horrified, scrambled to stop him. "Wait, I'll move it. I'll move it right now." Hank took a sip of his coffee. "See, Brenda, problem solved. Just move your car, and everything will be fine." He even offered a slight, sympathetic smile. With no other choice, and a crowd of curious neighbors watching, Brenda got into her SUV and, with a furious grinding of gears, reversed it back into her own driveway. Fuming, the tow truck left, Mike giving Hank a conspiratorial wink. Hank, without a word, got into old Betsy. He backed it up, maneuvered it perfectly, and parked it in his driveway, completely on the asphalt. He looked at Brenda, still seething in her car. "There, Brenda, compliant. See, no problem at all." He locked his truck and went back inside, leaving a defeated Brenda to stew in her own anger. Brenda's initial satisfaction had turned to bitter humiliation. This was not over, not by a long shot. The next day, Hank found a package on his doorstep. Inside was a neatly printed memo from the HOA. It wasn't about parking. It was a notice about his rose bushes. Section 9D. All garden flora visible from the street must be regularly trimmed to a height of no more than 3 feet and free of dead blooms. Hank's prize-winning hybrid tea roses, which stood proudly at 4 feet and were currently bursting with deep red blooms, were a violation. Brenda had found a new battlefield. Hank didn't touch the roses. Instead, that afternoon, he acquired something new. A small, unassuming, but incredibly powerful piece of equipment, a mini potato cannon. His grandson, a budding engineer, had shown him how to build one years ago, and Hank had always kept the blueprints. That evening, Brenda was hosting her weekly HOA meeting in her pristine living room. The windows were open to let in the cool evening air. As she passionately explained the importance of maintaining property values, a soft thwomp echoed from outside. A potato, perfectly peeled and slightly overripe, sailed gracefully through her open window and landed with a gentle splat directly into the bowl of artisanal olives on her coffee table. Silence. Then, a collective gasp. Brenda stared at the potato, then at the window, then at Hank's house across the street. There was no smoke, no sound, just the faint smell of cooked potato. It was too precise to be accidental. The next morning, Hank woke up to the sound of furious shouting. He looked out his window. Brenda was standing on her lawn, pointing frantically at her meticulously manicured rose bushes. They were gone, all of them, not just trimmed, but completely removed. In their place was a perfect, pristine patch of freshly laid, bright green artificial turf. It was the kind that looked too perfect to be real, a jarringly unnatural rectangle in the middle of her otherwise natural garden. A small, laminated sign was stuck into the turf. HOA approved. Maintenance free. Hank smiled. Brenda had clearly escalated, having his roses forcefully removed. But he hadn't removed her roses. Someone else had. He walked outside, a twinkle in his eye, and saw Brenda marching towards his house, a look of pure rage on her face. "Hank, what have you done?" she shrieked, her voice echoing down the quiet street. "My roses, they're gone." Hank looked genuinely puzzled. "Your roses, Brenda? I don't know anything about that. Perhaps you should check the HOA bylaws. I hear they're very strict about unapproved modifications to landscaping." He then looked at her house. "Oh, my, Brenda, is that artificial turf? I'm afraid that's a violation of Section 9F. No synthetic landscaping materials shall be visible from the street without prior architectural committee approval. And as far as I know, you didn't get approval for that." Brenda froze, her mouth agape. She stared at her perfectly artificial lawn, then back at Hank. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her HOA, had ordered the removal of her roses because they hadn't met the height requirement. And then, someone, likely a frustrated landscaping company, following standard procedure, had replaced them with the only maintenance-free option they had on hand, without seeking her approval. It was her own rule, her own bureaucracy, that had turned on her. And Hank, with his innocent questions, had just twisted the knife. Brenda had lost the battle, but not the war. Her humiliation at the hands of her own rules fueled a new, more dangerous resolve. She wasn't just fighting for the HOA anymore. She was fighting to reclaim her authority and her pride. She had a network of informers, neighbors, who secretly reported every stray garbage can lid and overgrown shrub. One of them had given her a new lead, a far more potent weapon than a parking ticket or a lawn violation. That day, as Hank hummed a tune while watering his tomatoes, a certified letter arrived. He opened it, expecting another HOA notice, but the letterhead was different. It was from a law firm. The content made his blood run cold. It was a formal complaint, not from the HOA, but from a concerned citizen about the condition of his property. It mentioned his peeling paint, the worn roof shingles, and the fact that a section of his fence was leaning slightly. The letter cited a specific city ordinance regarding property maintenance and warned of potential fines and legal action. The language was cold, impersonal, and undeniably serious. This was Brenda's new strategy. She had moved past HOA rules and was now using official city regulations, a level of bureaucracy Hank couldn't simply ignore or outsmart with a witty counter move. This was a direct, personal attack on his home, a place he had lived in for decades. This wasn't about a parking spot anymore. It was about forcing him out. Hank felt a surge of fury. He had put so much of himself into this house, the house he had raised his children in, and where he had spent his life with his late wife, Eleanor. He wouldn't let Brenda, with her petty obsession, take that from him. He immediately called his grandson, Ben, the young engineer who had helped with the potato launcher. Ben was smart, tech-savvy, and, most importantly, fiercely loyal to his grandfather. "Ben, I need your help," Hank said, his voice unusually strained. "Brenda's gone too far. She's trying to use the city to run me out of my own house," he explained the letter. Ben listened patiently, a quiet rage building in his own heart. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll look into this. I've got a few connections. I'll find a way to fight back." Meanwhile, Brenda was feeling a sense of vindication. She knew Hank couldn't afford a lawyer to fight City Hall. The fines would pile up, and soon he would be forced to sell. The thought gave her a chilling satisfaction. She had a plan, a final checkmate that would win her the war. That evening, Ben arrived at Hank's house. He had been doing some digging. "Grandpa, I found something. It's about Brenda's property." "It's not what it seems." Ben pulled out his laptop and showed Hank a detailed blueprint. It was an old survey of the neighborhood. The document revealed a surprising fact. Brenda's house, the jewel of the neighborhood, was built slightly over her property line, encroaching on her neighbor's land by a few feet. It was a small detail, likely a builder's error decades ago, but it was a clear and provable violation. "That's not the surprising part," Ben said, his voice low. "Look at the original filing date. Her house was built in the early 90s, before she moved here. The original owner had a dispute with a neighbor, and the case was settled out of court. The settlement involved a confidentiality agreement and a promise that the neighbor would never bring it up again." "So what?" Hank asked, confused. "What does that have to do with Brenda?" Ben looked at his grandfather, a solemn expression on his face. "The original owner of that house wasn't just a random person, Grandpa. It was my mother's first husband." "My father." Hank froze. He had never known this. His daughter had been married before, but she had never spoken of her first husband in detail, only that the marriage had been short and difficult. It had been before she met his son-in-law. Ben continued, "When my dad divorced her, he took a deal that gave him a huge chunk of money to keep quiet about the property line issue. He never told her, and she never knew. And the person who bought the house and got him to sign the confidentiality agreement, it was Brenda. She didn't just move into this neighborhood. She bought this house knowing about the violation, and she used her power and money to cover it up." The story suddenly took on a new dimension. This wasn't just about HOA rules or a parking spot. Brenda's obsession with control and order was a shield, a carefully constructed facade to hide her own massive violation. Her entire identity as the HOA President, the enforcer of perfection, was a lie built on a secret she had fought for years to protect. She was projecting her own deep-seated guilt and fear of being exposed onto every perceived imperfection in the neighborhood, especially Hank's. Hank looked at the blueprints, then at Ben. He understood now. Brenda wasn't fighting for the community. She was fighting to keep her own dirty secret buried. And Hank, the old man who just wanted to park his truck, had inadvertently stumbled upon the key to her entire operation. Hank didn't hesitate. He sent the blueprint and the evidence of the original settlement to the city's building department, code enforcement, and, most importantly, the local newspaper. He had given Brenda her chance, a chance to back down and end the petty war. But her relentless attacks on his home, on the memory of his wife, had crossed a line. Now, he was going to expose her for the fraud she was. He knew she would fight back, but he didn't expect how she would do it. The following morning, a group of workers arrived at Brenda's house. They were not contractors or landscapers. They were from the city's public works department, and they came with a large team and heavy machinery. Brenda was out on her lawn, clipboard in hand, supervising them with a cold, triumphant smile. Hank watched from his window, confused. Then he saw it. They weren't there to fix her lawn. They were there to remove a section of the city sidewalk that ran in front of her house. They began to dig, meticulously tearing up the perfect concrete. Brenda marched across the street to Hank's house, her face a mask of victory. "I see you've decided to play dirty, Hank," she said, holding up a new document. "Your little parcel of land, your precious home, has a serious problem." She handed him a new, official-looking notice. It wasn't from the city. It was from the federal government. Hank's eyes scanned the document, his heart pounding. It stated that his property was subject to a newly enacted environmental preservation law. A tiny, nearly invisible stream, long since dried up and covered, was designated a protected waterway in an old, forgotten land survey. The law required the land around it to be returned to its natural state. The stream bed, it turned out, ran directly under his front yard and, according to the document, required a significant portion of his house to be demolished to meet the new regulations. "I have a friend in Congress," Brenda said, her voice a whisper of pure malice. "She helped me find this law. I filed a petition to have it enforced, and I have a court order to prove it." Hank was speechless. This wasn't just a property violation. This was a direct, impossible to fight legal order that would destroy his home. Brenda was willing to use federal power to win. The twist, just as Brenda finished her chilling pronouncement, a new person walked onto the scene. A tall, well-dressed man in a suit, accompanied by two police officers, came up the street. He wasn't a lawyer or a government official. He was Ben's father Hank's son-in-law and a high-ranking officer in the Secret Service. Brenda's confident smile faltered. She had never seen him before. Hank, equally confused, looked at his son-in-law. "Brenda," the man said, his voice calm and authoritative. "My name is Agent Michael Foster. I'm with the Secret Service." Brenda's eyes widened. What is this about? I've done nothing wrong." Agent Foster ignored her, turning to Hank. "Dad, I apologize for not telling you sooner. The man Brenda used to get that law enforced, her congressional friend. She's not a politician. She's a high-level counterfeiter we've been tracking for years." He then turned back to Brenda, his voice hardening. "We believe you've been laundering money through the HOA, using fines and fees as a front for her illegal activities. We have evidence of you transferring funds to her offshore accounts. The environmental law, it's a complete fabrication, a cover for the fraud. We've been watching you for weeks, and this whole neighborhood war was our final piece of the puzzle." Brenda's face went white. She looked from Agent Foster to the two officers, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She had used the HOA, her supposed source of power, as a front for a massive criminal operation. Her obsession with rules and order was not just about control. It was a way to maintain her cover. She had gone to such extremes to win because the stakes were so much higher than a parking spot. The police officers moved in, their handcuffs glinting in the morning sun, with Brenda gone. The storm that had raged for days suddenly ceased. The HOA, now leaderless and exposed as a front for a criminal enterprise, dissolved. Neighbors, who had been hiding behind closed curtains, finally emerged, a mixture of shock and relief on their faces. They looked at Hank not as an old crank, but as a quiet hero who, in his stubborn fight for his truck, had unmasked a much bigger lie. The media swarmed the street for days, but Hank, with the help of his son-in-law, Agent Foster, kept a low profile. The phony federal order was dismissed, and Hank's house was safe. The neighborhood, once a place of enforced perfection, began to change. People talked to each other again. Lawns were a little less perfect, and gardens were a little more wild. Hank's roses, though gone, became a symbol of a freedom they had all forgotten they had. A few weeks later, Hank was sitting on his porch, drinking a glass of lemonade, when a young couple approached him. They were the new owners of Brenda's house. The house, it turned out, was seized by the government, and the new owners got a surprisingly good deal. They introduced themselves as Sarah and Mike. "We heard what happened," Sarah said, her voice filled with respect. "We just wanted to thank you. You're a legend around here." Mike pointed to the half-dug trench in their front yard. "The city said they'd fill it in, but we have a better idea. We were hoping you could help us with something." He then showed Hank a set of blueprints. They weren't legal documents or city ordinances. They were plans for a community garden. They wanted to turn the small, ugly trench into a beautiful, shared space for the neighborhood to grow vegetables and flowers. A place that would require cooperation, not compliance. Hank looked at the blueprints, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. He looked at his own garden, at his truck, and then at the young couple. He finally had a purpose that went beyond protecting his own home. He was helping to build a real community. As Hank got to work on the garden, he discovered something unexpected. While digging, he found an old, worn-out metal box buried under a layer of dirt, right on what was once Brenda's property line. Inside, wrapped in a brittle, old plastic bag, was an aged diary. The diary belonged to Brenda's grandfather. In it, he wrote about his daughter, a young, brilliant lawyer who was obsessed with finding the perfect place to live, a place where she could finally feel in control. He wrote about a secret he had kept from her for her own good, a massive, inherited debt from his failed business that he had to sell his land to pay off. He had to sell the property to a shady organization, who then sold it to Brenda. He had buried the diary there, hoping one day it would be found and his daughter would know the truth. Hank read the final, heartbreaking entry. It wasn't a secret about Brenda, it was her grandfather's secret. A secret that revealed Brenda's entire life was built on a lie she had no idea existed. Her obsession with rules, with control, was an inherited, desperate attempt to create a perfect life to cover the deep-seated, generational insecurity she didn't even know she had. She wasn't just a villain, she was a victim of a lie. The real villain was never Brenda, it was the inherited fear of not being good enough. And it had finally been exposed.